2 quick intros, Agnes?
Sure, it's wonderful to see everyone. My name is Agnes Bala, and I work for the University of California Office of the President in the Research Policy Analysis and Coordination Unit. As part of my role, I help our researchers navigate the various regulatory requirements when it comes to conducting cannabis or hemp research. And I am very excited to join you all to help support CRI.
And Agnes is a senior policy advisor here with us at CRI. She has really spearheaded the behind the scenes work that predates my time here, predates time Reggie's time here, and really helped us coordinate with crew and the folks at DHS in the kind of planning and initiation phase. So we are super fortunate that Agnes has agreed to continue supporting the work at CRI and is here with us.
Thank you, Christina.
So I'm Christina Sansoni. I'm a senior program manager with CRI. Most of you have engaged with me in some way. So I'm going to jump into the purpose for today's conversation in the agenda. Agnes is going to be my handler and try and keep me on task, on track, out of rabbit holes, out of the tangents, unless that's where the group wants the tangent to go. So truly feel free to just shout questions out. Raise your hand if you are so inclined, but this is a very chill group today. So the purpose is twofold. The first part of the purpose is to give a high-level overview of the provisions in the bill that Governor Pritzker signed into law on June 12th. The provisions that we're going to focus on are those that we expect to most directly impact the research landscape in Illinois. The secondary purpose is once we've shared a high-level overview and a couple of the questions that our team is puzzling through, we want to open it up to hear from you all about the questions you have, any concerns you have, what you're excited about. And what we hope to do with that information is part of our charge here at CRI to support researchers and community colleges in the cannabis ecosystem across Illinois. So, are there connections we can make for folks? Are there materials we can develop? Are there other supports that we can offer? That's what we hope is the what's next, those types of materials, interactions, supports, or connections. So the agenda itself, I'll run through a high-level overview of the new laws. Again, really, specific to research. The lovely little iceberg image is just want to be transparent that the law was an omnibus bill. So a bunch of stuff that got smashed together, sorry, my attorney friends, smashed together and passed as a package. Not legal language there, but that's the process. What that means is there were a ton of provisions and changes that we won't touch on today. More than happy to dig into them, but they are important, but not necessarily a direct one for one in a research context. So we'll scratch the surface on what was passed and is now law or about to become law. We'll talk about research implications in the context of hemp as well as medical patient program data. And then we'll open it up for discussion and Q&A. Timing wise, I would say probably 15 minutes max. Agnes, does that sound right for like the overview before we get to discussion?
Yeah. Yep.
But again, feel free to just ask questions or interrupt, or if you're feeling super polite today, feel free to raise your hand. Any anything, Agnes? I can't see chat or anything. I'm really sorry, but is there anything, or are we ready to go to the next slide?
Nope, we're ready to go. So Nate provided the official text of the whole bill in case you want to follow along in there. But I think otherwise we're ready to go.
Thank you. Thanks, Nate. Appreciate the assist. Q, can you take us to the next slide? So this is the whole tip of the iceberg, just scratching the surface here. On the left side of the screen, we've got the two columns that are going to what we believe will most directly impact the research environment in Illinois. So we've got the creation of the Illinois Hemp Act, which aligns hemp definitions with the federal hemp changes that were passed in 2025 and go into effect in 2026. We've got a provision that allows for the use of medical patient data for research purposes in Illinois, which is a huge shift. And then we've got four provisions up there that are not directly related to research, but they're all in areas where there is existing research in Illinois or through our community engagement with the public as well as research community. People have identified these as areas where they would like to be able to conduct research and or explore impacts of the policy changes on the groups. So the first column, if you will, is the provision that now allows adult use dispensaries to request a medical dispensary license. And Nate, if I've got that language wrong, please do correct me in chat or just jump in. It also increases the allowable possession limits for both in-state and out-of-state residents. So that's connected to some of the criminal legal implications and things that folks are interested in exploring. It decreases some of the fees and allows more time for dispensaries to become operational. And it also increased the craft grow or non-MSO multi-state operator canopy from 5,000 feet to 14,000 feet. That just means the grow space. That's what the canopy means. And then it also included a provision to allow non-retail storage and transfer for transporters, which again is a social equity lottery or license holder track. So we've got adult use can now request medical dispo license, which is folks have talked about access, equity, and just medical patient availability or cost to purchase for medical patients who might be purchasing at an adult use because they're paying that tax. We've got the possession limits, which is mostly around criminal legal impacts. And then we've got those two far right columns that are around mostly the smaller operators and supports that would make it more viable for them to participate in the market. Do I have anything in chat, Agnes, or am I good to go?
You are
Okay.
good.
Next slide, please, Q. And I see, Agnes, that you had shared the a little more info about the federal changes. This slide is the language from the federal changes that go into effect November 12th, that Illinois is now aligned with. Wonky, not super sexy and exciting, but that's the language on screen. Hopefully, it's not an entirely new concept for folks. But if it is, feel free to ask any questions, and we're happy to either share any information now or follow up with some info.
Let me jump in here for just a second.
Please.
So the biggest changes under the federal hemp definitions is that originally, as created under the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp was defined as those marijuana or cannabis materials that have less than 0.3% delta 9 THC. The recent federal hemp change, rather than looking at just delta 9 THC, now says anything that or any THC concentration of less than 0.3% THC is hemp, and anything above it is marijuana. So that's some of the kind of the biggest change in the federal bill. And then it also creates these new definitions around intermediate hemp-derived cannabinoid products. And I think there's a final cannabinoid products, but it's quite similar. But really that inclusion of all THC instead of just looking at delta 9 THC is the biggest change, I would say. And that's where the Illinois Hemp Act also aligns with now.
In addition to specifying all of the like most or many of the known compounds, constituent compounds, and Reggie, I'm probably not getting it right, so please correct me on the language here. In cannabis, or rather in hemp, that were being converted to an intoxicating compound and then sold under the what I'm going to call the loophole created by the 2018 Farm Bill. So this language trued up and closed that loophole, if you will, and Illinois is now aligned with the definitions at the federal level, all of which go into effect or become effective on November 12th of this year. Anything else, Agnes, Nate, Reggie?
You got it right, so we're good.
Okay.
I'll just add the Illinois law, if there's changes to the federal definition, there's some wiggle room on what gets applied and implemented in Illinois. So if there are changes on federal hemp policy and these definitions, stay tuned and keep a close eye on nitty-gritty legalese conversations in Illinois on what happens next.
So not sexy, but super important context, because if the federal law changes, I'm hearing you say that wiggle room is really like the space that allows for changes to also be made in Illinois.
It means if there's federal changes, big if,
Yeah.
pay attention if those changes apply to Illinois. So like two ifs.
Caveat, yeah, caveats upon caveats, but it's allowable then to adjust language if federal shifts. So from a research perspective, we are operating with the information we know now. And Nate, you're just kind of making sure that we're all aware of the fact that it might change if federal changes in the context of research coming down the pike. Hugh, can you take us to the next slide? So jumping straight to the Illinois Hemp Act, again, a gazillion provisions in here, but I'm really focused right now on the provision on the left because effective at signage on June 12th, the sale of intoxicating hemp products to anyone under age 21 is now you're not allowed to sell to anyone age 21, 20 and younger, and you must provide proof of age to be 21 or older. And it increases enforcement capabilities if any entity is selling those products to people aged 20 and younger. So there have been quite a few questions and concerns and, potential research interest around, well, what does that look like now from a consumer safety perspective? And so the Illinois Hemp Act immediately upon signage made those products, it made it illegal to sell those products to people 20 and under, increased that enforcement capability, effective November 12th, to align with the federal definition and the federal track, those products fall under the cannabis regulation framework. I'm not really going to talk much about what that looks like from an enforcement capacity, but Nate, if there's anything that you wanted to jump in and share that you think is really important for folks to know before I take us to the specific industrial hemp definition. Assuming no. Okay. So here's the thing that I am hearing the highest number of questions and concern about. Given that there are a decent number of folks, Reggie, the director of CRI included, who have been conducting research on hemp-derived cannabinoids, with the new definition, there are questions around, well, what does that mean for my existing research or planned research? So the definition of industrial hemp now includes, let let the locals know. Got it. We will share any additional information if there is additional information around enforcement and compliance in terms of like, I'm making this up. Like if there were to be like a hotline or anything like that, we'll absolutely follow up and share as that kind of unfolds over the next couple of months. Sorry, Agnes, keep me on task here. So
Yes, you're doing great. Let's get back to this part.
back to industrial hemp. The definition of industrial hemp has a specification that included in that definition is hemp that does not enter the stream of commerce and is intended to support hemp research at an institution of higher education. What that means is a source of hemp or a cultivator that is only producing hemp for the purposes of research, and that hemp will never enter the commerce stream in any capacity for any purpose to any other actor. That cultivation is allowed. And that language mirrors the language again at the federal level. And there have been at least two now, I believe, reports from the CRS, the Congressional Research Service. I might be using the wrong S there. That specify and underscore that specific inclusion in the definition of industrial hemp is meant to allow research to continue occurring or for new research to occur under that track. So I want to pause and see if anyone has any questions, anything, because this is a big question that we are hearing from folks, or Reggie as the resident rock star science guy on the call. Is there any additional context or information that you think is important for folks to understand and know? And you're muted.
Yeah, no, I realized I was muted, and um, you know, other things that I think that they should know is that at least in my opinion, the potential um for there to be a significant um what's the word I'm looking for? Wall or potential inhibitory effect of the new rules on what was typically hemp research under the old definition. Let me give a little context. So a lot of the work that I did as a hemp researcher was strictly cannabinoid research because, as we know, cannabis and hemp are, or rather, let me say it as marijuana and hemp are the same plant, and with the exception of THC, they have all the same minor cannabinoids and other chemicals. And so, the way to do the work that was important before was to do it in hemp and avoid the problems associated with doing Schedule One cannabis research. So I think people who may not be fully cognizant of what these changes mean is that there's the potential for this industrial hemp versus cannabinoid hemp, right? Because again, it's still not marijuana. It doesn't have THC, to be kind of um, an innocent bystander in this change, right? So, and I know that, other people may have different opinions, but the outcome for me is that to hedge my bets, I have to now apply for Schedule 3 and potentially Schedule 1 licenses to be able to continue to do the work that I did before without the need of any license, right? So I think that's important for people to understand that, and And I think people also need to understand what Schedule 3 really means, because I think a lot of people also believe that Schedule 3 will mean uh, so adult use when if and when the government meets on the 29th to have their next hearing, if Schedule 3 ends up being where adult use, quote unquote, goes, it is likely going to make things look different. And I think a lot of people in the industry haven't really stopped to consider this. So I'll stop there. So
Yeah, thanks, Reggie. I think you bring up some good points. There's a handful of moving parts happening here. So let me take a step back real quick. So fully acknowledging that conducting research in the cannabis space is very difficult to navigate with a lot of barriers at hand. The federal hemp changes that occurred in November of last year, November 12th, 2015, what it did is it redefined hemp that was originally defined in the 2018 Farm Bill, and it redefined it in a way that we're no longer, again, kind of no longer looking at the threshold of what we consider hemp to be uh, under 0.3% delta 9 THC, but now the definition of hemp, which is going to be become effective November 12th of 2016, is that hemp is 0.3% 0.3% total THC. All right, so it does bring in, it kind of expands or kind of closes loopholes to where previously there could have been more things that were considered hemp. That being said, as long as there's a kind of regular testing mechanism to make sure that plants don't test hot, and disposal plans, and kind of meeting the proper state licensures, hemp research can continue and does continue under the Illinois Hemp Act. Where we get into a little bit of uncertainty is what happened more recently was the decision by the federal DOJ to move some things, some cannabis products into a Schedule 3. That's kind of a separate conversation which we can get back to, but let's finish up on what happened here in Illinois.
Thank you, Agnes. Thanks, Reggie. So I'm gonna again kind of take a pause for a moment and connect it back to rulemaking, which we haven't talked about anywhere. So as it on the books right now in Illinois, there is an Industrial Hemp Act, and there are rules associated with implementing the Industrial Hemp Act. I do not work for the Department of Ag. I'm not going to presume to speak for the Department of Ag, but on November 12th, the Illinois Hemp Act supersedes, and the Industrial Hemp Act goes away, if you will. So all hemp in Illinois, industrial or hemp grown and cultivated and processed into a product that now is in one of those hemp-derived cannabinoid spaces that would fall under the final product under the cannabis regulation framework. That still leaves the industrial hemp side of it and regs that are in place with Department of Ag rules for the existing Industrial Hemp Act. The part that I'm not going to presume to speak on, but it is an open question that I have, is whether the Department of Ag, and it's probably less whether, it's what the Department of Ag will adjust for the existing rules, because again, the existing rules match the current Industrial Hemp Act, which goes away on November 12th. So I'm making an assumption that some of those rules will have to shift to now match the Illinois Hemp Act, which again will include that industrial hemp track as well. Another assumption I'm making is that that rulemaking process will occur now, and those rules will be in place when the new Illinois Hemp Act goes fully into effect with those provisions, including the Industrial Hemp Act on November 12th. So that is an assumption that I'm explicitly making, is that rulemaking process will be occurring now, and those rules will be in place at November 12th or very soon thereafter. But TBD. Governor Pritzker just signed this into law, 12 days ago. So folks have got to figure out the process and then share the process and then go through the process, right? And publish the rules and all those fun things that come with governance. So in the context of cultivating hemp and then being able to use that hemp for said research purposes under that industrial hemp definition, the hope is that the rules are in place, people can start cultivating, and research can be conducted, to Reggie's point, in a way that allows people to research, to continue an ongoing body of work, or to be very clear about what is and is not allowed under hemp cultivation, as opposed to what might fall into a cannabis category that would require a different license to work and conduct research under. So separate, but connected in like circuitous and in non-linear ways. We all just kind of lobbed a lot of blah at folks. Does anyone have questions, clarification, or?
I see that Reggie has a question in the chat, but I'd like, if you don't mind, I'd like to come back to that another time, just because that follows more of the federal change instead of what we're looking at here. So if there's time at the end, we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Well, so the reason why I asked it was because if Illinois is aligning itself with the federal rules, I guess I should have asked it a little bit differently. Um, Maybe the question should have been, is Illinois also considering something like the similar effects clause? Is maybe a better question.
Let's get back to that.
Okay, no problem. Yeah.
Yep.
Because my answer is I can't speak to what legislators, rulemakers, and policymakers are thinking about or not. But if we have any rulemakers, policymakers, or agency folks on when we get to the Q&A part in just a couple minutes, we'll be sure to see if we can tap them, or if nothing else, make note of the question. Anything else, Agnes?
Nope, I think we're good to move on.
Okay, so medical patient program data for research. Thank you, Q. This is a huge shift in Illinois. Previously, interpretation of statute on, plain language reading and interpretation was such that no medical patient data was allowed to be used for research purposes. There have been a couple circumstances, is my understanding, over the past, I don't know, probably 6 or 7 years, where some limited de-identified data was supplied, but certainly not on a, I don't even want to say large scale, but certainly no process and no larger studies or ongoing data requests have been the case for medical patient data. So this is the very unsexy language from statute that is on screen. The big thing here for folks is not just that it's allowable now, which is a big thing. It's a huge shift. But I want to draw folks' attention to the provision that it can be used to support other medical research into the effects of medical cannabis, with those protective factors in place, of course. And this caveat down here at the bottom, and shall include only data related to patients who submitted initial applications after the effective date. So that wouldn't necessarily allow retrospective analyses. And from a statistical perspective, I'm not a quantitative researcher, so please, quant folks, jump in and correct my language if I'm off here. But from a research perspective, what's the sample size and how long is it going to take to get to a sample where you can detect a statistical difference and make some of the types of statements that the quant folks are trying to dig in and unpack. So do you have a sample size large enough to detect those differences, a true difference, as opposed to it looks different, but you only had a sample size of 5 people. So a sample size of 5 people is really different than a sample size of 5,000 people or 10,000 people if we're talking individual applicants. I don't have a handle on how many people have applied and are current medical patients. I don't know if others on the call or if there is data available on a year by year or aggregate basis, or if anyone has a mean over the entirety of the medical program. I have no handle on how many people on an annual basis are submitting a new application as opposed to a renewal, or layer in the opioid prescription program, which allows patients with an opioid prescription to secure a medical cannabis patient card. There are a whole lot of unknowns, but from a research perspective, that provision is really important because it won't allow retrospective analyses. And from a timeline perspective, again, we're talking about rules and processes. The Department of Public Health is going to have to figure out a process to take in those requests, to confirm that you have the appropriate IRB, the required appropriate protections in place, match data, de-identify data, and then turn around a data set. So they have to figure out a process for all of those pieces, which will take time. And there's an unknown around how long it will take to have enough new applications to actually get to the point of having a decent sample size. But quant researchers on the call, is there any additional kind of color or context around like sample size that I'm just not clocking that you feel is important for us to know? I'm guessing none, Agnes? Okay.
I'm not seeing anything right now, but Nate did put a really helpful link to this report. And on page 74, it says that the total number of initial applications submitted to NMCPP in FY25 was 25,765.
So my sample size of 5 was wildly off base is my takeaway.
I was just looking, Minnesota just released a study of medical patients in Minnesota, and they have a very different setup where their medical program kind of had a research bent from the beginning. And they have a medical patient survey that's like part of their medical patient program and administration. And I think that this language reflects a lot of DPH's concerns on making sure there's informed consent of being willing to participate in research and being part of being an active engagement. I mean, in Minnesota, I know that there's a lot of different opt-in, opt-out options for the patient surveys, and the administrative data is there on medical patients historically, but reflective of needing to respect people's opportunities and patient rights and data rights, this sort of research is intended to go forward. And on a quantitative point on just kind of sample size, there's about 50,000 patients who make purchases in any given month, unique patients that make purchases, and about 120, 130,000 medical patients that are registered uh, at any given time. So 50,000 making purchases, 25,000 a year registrations. There's a few pieces in this bill, in this new law that are could encourage people to become medical patients that weren't there in the past, codifying some new conditions, um, allowing telehealth visits for patients. So you don't have to actually go see a doctor, but you can do a telehealth visit and get a certification from that healthcare practitioner. Um, and uh, all dispensaries are going to be eligible to request medical dispensary licenses, um, which is definitely a tax incentive for the dispensaries to make more sales to medical patients if there are more medical patients available, um, along with federal changes. Like there could be a move to increases in medical patient populations in Illinois. So hypothetically, the 25,000 new initial applications after from when the law goes forward for 12 months could be probably a floor versus a ceiling. Um, but that's speculation. I don't actually know what's going to happen next.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think all to say with this section is that there's definitely an opportunity here to be able to use important information maintained by the state to be able to do uh, further work in this space. I think, the point that Christina was narrowing in on is that it's probably going to take, some time before that collection of information becomes available and meaningful enough.
Yeah. And just to underscore that, Agnes, that is a question that I have gotten, I don't even know how many times since, between the 12th and today, was around the retrospective aspect, as well as, there is no process in place yet. They have to develop a process for researchers to request the data, let alone the internal processes to clean and marry with other potential data sets, depending on what that researcher request looks like. So the questions that we have heard have been mostly around the retrospective or perhaps like a misunderstanding and thinking that people can start submitting like today their research request. There is no process yet. Nate, I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add around those pieces.
Uh, I'd be very curious uh, if people are interested in requesting medical patient data, uh, staying in touch with CRI and or crew, like there's some different language depending on which type of medical patient. Uh, so like there's a couple different types of language. So I'm not sure if that means that there has to be like some careful tailoring of what you're actually requesting and which data sets or types of patients you're trying to look into, um, or maybe not. I, I'm not quite sure how it all connects and works together. So, um, but like this is a big change from the past where it's been extremely clear that medical patients are not, their data is not allowed to be used for anything other than just administration of the cannabis program. So this is a pretty massive change, and the level of detail, there's a lot of really useful research that could potentially happen here.
I mean, just on that note, real quick, that was I think the literal first question that I got when I joined Cannabis Research Institute was, what can you guys do to help get access to medical patient data for a whole bunch of different research interests and activities. So that's a long-standing interest, and it's a gap in research, right? So I am hopeful that on our team, as well as other folks and, collaborators or separate research projects, I'm hopeful that there is quite a bit of interest in working with those data and those data sets. All right. So we kind of did discussion and some like Q&A, but that's really everything that we have to talk about. So what are the questions that you all have? What are your concerns? What are you excited about? What do you see as opportunity? How might we be able to support? Nate, raising your hand, so polite. Jump on in.
Look at me being polite. Uh, I had a couple other things just to point out with the legislation. Is it okay if I
Please,
rattle off a couple more?
please.
Um, Folks might be interested. The community college pilot was removed. The sunset was removed. So vocational training programs at community colleges continue and are still going to be registered with licensed by Department of Ag. Um, so that was a big change. I think that there was an opioid alternative pilot program and so this is where like the language of what type of medical patient, I think that was still considered a pilot program and that the pilot piece was removed.
Yep.
So that's a much smaller portion. So if you look at the annual report that I linked in the chat, it has the numbers and it's much smaller numbers, but potentially a very different and interesting population for research purposes. Again, look at the language on what how the data can be researched and used. There might be benefits or I honestly don't. It looked complicated and I noted it for awareness and that's it. Um, there's also a piece on sales data. Uh, in the past, it was all viewed as confidential. If you were looking at anything below like sub populations in sales data, there's now language where it's clear that so long as the grouping of stores is four or more locations, we can release more granular sales data across the state. So
And if someone would like to obtain access to the sales data, how might they go about that?
I think I don't know. Uh, you could try to contact Department of Financial and Professional Regulations or Crew, and I'll put in our email because it might be easier. Um, the other piece on just data access that might interest folks on this call, um, the Department of Revenue is allowed to respond to provide official reports um, at the jurisdictional level, and it's intended so that like if a county is interested in what sales revenue or tax revenue they can expect from the cannabis fund for locations in their jurisdiction, they can request it even if there's only one store in that location. I Similar to the other question, I'm not quite sure what that means for research purposes, but also worth looking at and thinking about if you're interested in sales data and potentially want to try to assess how that works in the grand scheme of your research.
So I'm hearing some potential if folks are interested. And if folks want to learn more, you'll drop that email or website or whatever contact information in chat, and we will share that with folks as well. And of course, as things get finalized and rules and processes become available, we'll start sharing that out as well. On the shift from pilot to permanent for the community college vocational program, that that what is now permanent is what authorizes or allows community colleges to cultivate cannabis should they be able to. And be able to, I mean, like their administrators agree and allow it, and they meet the security protocols and regs associated with cannabis cultivation. So that's the program. There are other, components of that, of course, but that's the probably the top line interest to community colleges in that space. And that did become permanent. Sam, another polite person. Thank you for raising your hand.
No, not a problem at all. I have a question as a layman in the meeting. With the state law aligning with the federal law, does that create an opportunity or does it create barriers for securing hemp for research?
Well, um, Agnes, I saw you come off mute. Do you want to go? You go first, and then I'll go
I,
after you.
I don't think it's either, really. I think it just, at least to me, I appreciate that the language mirrors each other so that we're not having to follow and navigate convoluted sets of laws, right? I think I think it's clear that there's still the opportunity to grow hemp for research purposes. And so long as the plants aren't testing hot, there's still an opportunity to do work on derivatives of those plant. And so in my mind, I appreciate the alignment so that we're just really focusing on one thing instead of having to keep in separate limits, separate definitions in mind. So,
To, another part of that is from I am not employed by the hemp industry. I have no actual connection to them in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But most of the folks cultivating hemp are either cultivating like industrial hemp, and by that I mean for like textiles or paper or hempcrete, like what I would call a more like true industrial product or industrial application, maybe a better way to say that. Um, and the other folks cultivating hemp are largely cultivating hemp to be processed into some of these, what will now fall under the, intermediate and final cannabinoid products, meaning that they're cultivating hemp and kind of cashing in on that loophole, for lack of better term. And so that's a revenue stream for them. So I don't really, there are incentives, right, for market participation and cultivating for one end use as opposed to another. So, in the context of research, I think it's back to Agnes, like neither, I think it's neutral. I think that there will be some positive impacts. And I think that depending on your frame and your lens, as in if you are currently cultivating hemp, and your revenue stream under that cultivation is in that product category that is then going to fall under the cannabis framework in November, you're probably not viewing that as positive because that's your revenue stream, and that revenue stream goes away under hemp cultivation. From a research perspective, I think there's an opportunity, but that opportunity is not as consistent, if you will, the way that cultivating hemp for those cannabinoid products might be more consistent and might be a more consistent revenue stream. But I'm not an attorney. I don't work in the industry. I'm making assumptions. And I'm also, again, like my bias, my lens here is research and research communities. So can researchers continue to gain access to products that allow them to continue their research portfolio? And if there are cultivators that can commit to keeping that hemp out of the stream of commerce, because that's what the definition says, and the only use of that where it would, there would be a transfer, if you will, would be for research purposes, that would provide, I would think, tremendous value to researchers like Reggie and others and could provide a revenue stream with some other potential opportunities because I'm an out the box thinker. Can you create pathways where, I mean, Reggie works with specific strains and specific, health conditions where those strains are providing value. So, an absence of those strains, how does he get access to those strains to continue conducting his research? But now
Oh,
I'm
thank
kind
you.
of down a rabbit hole, sorry.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you, Agnes and Christina, for that information. And I just think about where we are at Heartland Human Care Services. Like we've got 2+ acres of farmland here in the city. We've got another 10 acres outside through partnership, and wanting to be in the workforce development space. We're connected with Breakthrough. We are part of the VeggieRx program. So us being able to be in a position to do research falls in line with with our values, right? In terms of being able to service the community, help it grow healthy, and be able to provide opportunities for young folks in the community in terms of career pathways. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. Ben, I'm loving how polite everyone is today. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question about, I guess it's related to research in terms of like consumer behavior. And that is with these new definitions, now it seems people who are wanting THC for whatever purpose, medical or otherwise, sometimes get hemp-derived products at like unlicensed dispensaries that are all over the place, Chicago, for sure. Like, are those going away now? Or what happens to that? Or will they only be able to, will people only be able to get THC products, above 0.3% at licensed dispensaries?
So, there are kind of two answers to that, and then I'm gonna perhaps turn it over to back to Nate. But the one answer is effective June 12th, 12 days ago. Those products can only be sold to people age 21 and above that it contain the THC, like the intoxicating aspects, right? And come November 12th, the same day the federal definitions go into effect, those intoxicating products, yes, would fall under the cannabis regulation framework, is my understanding. Meaning that, yes, they would have to be sold through a licensed dispensary and will be subject to all of the regs for cannabis. But Nate,
If they're selling intoxicating THC products, it should, after November 12th, be viewed as cannabis and should be sold through the cannabis legal framework. So those stores should not be selling intoxicating cannabis products after November 12th.
And will that also be true of beverages in restaurants and so on? Yeah. Okay.
And like there's lots of provisions in the law that explain that there's multiple different enforcement mechanisms. So local law enforcement can enforce, the attorney general can enforce, county states attorneys can enforce, like the state can regulatory wise enforce, like intending to make sure that like we can catch if it's THC that is intoxicating, it should be through the regulatory framework of the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act or the Compassionate Use Act. So that's the intent and the goal. There's a lot of murkiness that's being promoted by, I think, the hemp industry, that like there's gray area here. I think it's pretty clear if you have anything that has intoxicating products, it should go through the CRTA. I think that there is an interesting point, and I think Christina pointed this out. If it's for research purposes. Maybe there is some gray space of hemp that is for research purposes, then it's not necessarily part of the CRTA, like part of intoxicating hemp product that should be through the regulated state market. So just cautioning my words of like there's no gray area when it comes to research, but I do think that it's pretty clear as I read the law and as like the state has kind of what we've been interpreting and looking at for the law, it's black and white if it's above 0.3% THC or any sort of intoxicating product or 4 milligrams, just like very low. Scratch that in the form. I think it's zero point 0.4 milligrams. It's very, very low thresholds to qualify.
Thank you. We're a minute over, folks. Appreciate you all sticking with us to the end. Want to give an opportunity. Does anyone have like one last question or something they want to make sure they ask so we can follow up on that? If the answer is no, that's totally okay.
I feel like Agnes, do you know on Reggie's question on similar effects, is that the FDA list that's supposed to come out?
Yeah, so I did look that up real quick while Christina was talking, and that follows um so it is included in the definition of intermediate hemp-derived cannabinoid products, which it basically lists out things that it uh, uh, cannot have, and it cannot have a total more than a total of THC concentration of 0.3%, including THCA and any other cannabinoids that have similar effects or are marked to have similar effects. I think what we have to keep in mind, though, is that this definition is specific to products that are intended for consumption and are intended to enter into the stream of commerce. And so if that is not what if the intent of the product is for growing for the sake of conducting research, I think there is still an opportunity to continue to do that, even with this kind of murky similar effects inclusion.
I also think that probably if you're growing a hemp product and you're not going to market it and promote it as a intoxicating product, like it's probably, Reggie, correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably not like your hemp that you're growing for research is gonna like get you high. Like that's not probably right, Reggie?
I mean, I mean, under the old definition, hemp had very little chance of getting you high because properly grown hemp wasn't going to be over 0.3%. But this leads to my next question, which is then what about intermediate hemp-derived products, right? So, and the reason why I asked that question specifically is because in order for me to do my work, right, I have to grow hemp, I have to extract it, and that extraction is done in a way that I can maximize recovery of minor cannabinoids, right? So it's not intended for the revenue stream, right? But at the same time, the form that I put on my HPLC might actually be over 0.3% because of the way it was extracted, and I need it to be concentrated enough to see the really minor cannabinoids. So what does that mean?
So
Yeah.
you are getting towards something that a question that I posed to our legal counsel, which is something that I would assume other people might be in similar circumstances. But right now, CRI has in Illinois, we have a hemp cultivation license and a hemp processing license. We are neither cultivating nor processing, but we have those licenses, which mean we are legally allowed to do so. So my question to legal was, with all my standard caveats, I'm not an attorney. I don't write policy. I don't set policy. I'm just trying to figure out what we can do within legal bounds here. as I understand it, we have this cultivation license, we have a processing license. Does that mean that we can internally for Reggie's research, does that mean that we could cultivate, process into, I don't know, whatever he needs to do his work and then conduct that research, as in it's a closed environment. So it's not necessarily something that would allow us to cultivate for other folks' research, but specific to Reggie's research, that is a question that I have out to legal. Can we cultivate and process, and then Reggie conduct his research with what we have cultivated and processed under that industrial hemp definition? And again, it's never intended to be a consumer product. It would be processed for research purposes only. But now we're back to my caveat that I'm not an attorney. So I'm also kind of getting at the fact that, like, if we have those questions, 100% other people have those questions. So back to the purpose, what can we learn? What can we share across the University of Illinois research community? And we'll start engaging across the state with other researchers to figure out what their questions are, concerns, what they're excited about, and how can we create some resources, a suite of, maybe 10-minute explainer videos with some briefs and things like that. So lots of questions. And when we get answers or get closer to answers, we will start actively sharing that information. And then having these conversations on, okay, what next? So now you've got this, what other questions do you have? And we'll just, kind of keep it going.
I think actually from the state law, Reggie, hemp-derived cannabinoid product, even an intermediate one, if it's not intended for human or animal consumption, like if you're using it for something that's other than, like, it's okay if the concentration gets above 0.3%, which would put it definitely in that like
Right.
bucket that's not hemp, but it's the intermediate or the final product is not intended for human or animal consumption. I think that then means that it's not. But like, this is something that like I'm sure universities legal would want like
Yeah.
lots of
Those are,
analysis
but
of and checking
those
and
those are the provisions and the references that I provided to legal, because like I laid it all out for him to help him understand in my non-attorney capacity what my understanding and my read was. But that those were exactly the provisions that I referenced to help me understand and confirm. And more than that, get that interpretation in writing. So that I'm 100% clear that Reggie's work is not at jeopardy by university, like the university perspective, because I know that we're in compliance with the cultivation and processing, like the regs to secure those licenses.
Lots of gray area.
Well,
Lots,
I don't know
lots.
that there's gray area. I think that there are
Or
questions that need to be
yeah.
answered, but
Okay.
the answer to those questions might depend on legal interpretation.
I agree.
think
I will
And,
adopt your terminology.
and also the scope of the work too.
Right.
That's the other piece that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
the other one that
Okay.
I wanted to point out is like this is pretty monumental change at the federal level on like there's been such clear like if you touch cannabis like the feds are like ready to crack down on you and be very aggressive. And these changes like make it very clear that there is movement and a slight change happening at the federal level that and slight like might be larger than I'm meaning. And that's a very different world that we're entering from the past. Like it universities' complete hesitation to get anywhere near cannabis. I feel like with the federal change that happened, there's potentially quite a bit of movement and room there.
I hope so.
Me too.